Thank you for being here tonight. And I know your time is valuable, and evenings are especially valuable if you have children. So thank you for making the time to come together. So we're going to go through quite a few things this evening. And if there is something, point of clarification that will help you understand what's coming up, and I didn't make it clear, since we're a small enough group, I think we can just say, I didn't get that point, or whatever it is that you don't get. So let me go to this first slide here. I like this quote: "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it solely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one corner of the earth all one's lifetime." That was Mark Twain. So, yeah, it was interesting. You live in a mobile society. You see a lot of things. You see a lot of different cultures every day. So you're certainly not vegetating in one corner of the earth for your lifetime. But it's a richness of experience, and we're going to talk about what that richness entails, especially for young people. So tonight we're going to do a little introduction about the topic of third culture kids, and I will define that term. A short history lesson about how this idea of this special group of young people started, why a cross-cultural childhood matters, and why a mobile childhood matters, and how to grow from the gifts and challenges that we all face in a cross-cultural, multicultural environment. So just looking at people living outside of their passport countries, it's now about 250 million. This was a statistic from 2017, the last time someone tried to attempt to count. But it would be the fifth largest virtual country in the world if you put together all the people that are living outside of their passport countries. So it's a very large population, and it's a very much of a growing population. So the chances of us encountering more and more cultures and more multicultural people are increasing. So just looking at millennials, young people that were surveyed, this is just recently, 80% are across the board of major countries are planning to work abroad. 70% are using non-native language in their careers, and 94% think they were going to work across more borders than their parents ever did. So this is the expectation of the upcoming generation. It's highly mobile. It's adaptable, it's cross-cultural, and all of those skills are being formed in the years where these young people are growing up and how they are growing up. So just a little bit of a history. Who are third culture kids? The first kind of rough definition of third culture kids came from Dr. Ruth Usim, who's a sociologist, and she said it was children who accompany their parents into another culture, usually for parent career choice. Now, that was kind of the first loose definition. Someone moved overseas for a company or a mission or something else, and she noticed that these children were growing up in a different environment than a monocultural environment. And so that was kind of the first idea. The first idea was you have one worldview if you're in a monocultural society. Then as you experience cross cultures, you have another worldview or more worldviews, until that is actually becoming your view. And we're going to talk about what this third culture is. So the first culture could be the home or the passport culture of the parents. Some of those may be bicultural, so the one parent may be from one country and another parent may be from another, but that is one of the host cultures. The second is the host culture. In this case, where we are now in the UAE, would be the host culture. If we transported this room to Germany, the host culture would be Germany. So that's the host culture, the receiving culture that we're living in, that our children are growing up in. The third would be this interstitial, the in-between lifestyle, the international lifestyle, and it's neither one or the other. It's neither the parents' passport culture, nor is it fully the culture in which children are living. So that's the idea of what the third culture is. Another way of thinking about this is we talk a lot about international people, international teens, internationals, and really if you just separate international, it's between nations. And that's exactly where these young people find themselves, is between nations, between their parents' passport cultures, between their host culture and the third culture where they relate to other people that are going through a similar experience. And so that's the third culture piece. This was further defined by Dave Pollock, who said a person who spent a significant part of his or her developmental years, so that's an important point, while they're still forming their identity, outside of the parent's culture or cultures. And although elements from each culture are assimilated into the TCK life experience, the sense of belonging is actually in relationship to others of similar background. So the strongest relationships are built by people that are going through the same thing. And in this case, third culture kids bridging cultures and being in between their parents' culture and the host culture. I want you to listen carefully in this next video to hear she's a beyond college age student, but she's a young person, and she's trying to describe herself as a third culture kid, think about the idea of where she grew up and how she describes her identity and how she comes across in the way that she speaks about herself. So here we go. It's coming.
Where are you from? Malaysia. You don't look Malaysian. Where are you really from? Okay, I'm from India. So then why did you say you were Malaysian? Why didn't you just tell me where you're originally from? Also, how's your English so good? What was that little monologue I just did there? That's basically what a TCK goes through every time you ask them where they're from. What is a TCK? A TCK is a third culture kid. A third culture kid is someone who is born in one country, but is raised up in another. Why three cultures? Why that weird arbitrary number? Your first culture is the culture where your parents come from or the passport you hold. Assuming that your parents are from the same culture, of course. Your second culture is the culture you grow up in. Your third culture is the culture that you negotiate as a result of being in your first and your second culture. Now, every TCK has a different TCK experience, but we'll get into that a little later. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Abir Yusuf, and that's not a spelling mistake. It does not mean alcohol by any measure of the name. It actually means fragrance in Arabic. And I'm not from India. Again, sorry. I was born in India, but I was raised in the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and most significantly in Malaysia. If you ever go into my Facebook profile, you'll see that I have not filled out where I'm currently located or where I'm actually from, because that gives me a serious sweat issue whenever I think about it. Whenever I have to fill out a form, I literally have an identity crisis, and this is not even a joke. The reason is because I have 5 addresses to choose from. 5 addresses in the whole world. But if you were to ask me, okay, Abir, where do you feel most at home? It's not going to be any one of those 5 addresses. Where I feel most at home is actually Changi Airport. That is in Singapore. I don't even live in Singapore. But the reason why it's the place that I feel most at home at is because that's where I used to fly out of all the time when I was a kid.
So as you think about, she's trying to sort it out, right? Who am I? Where do I belong? I can't even say it, practically. And when I try to fill out a form and have to put one ownership on one, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have full ownership in any of the cultures. I want to have a foot in each one of them. Did you hear her saying that? And to think about that an airport for her feels like home, right? The place that she belongs. It's an airport. It's not even a nation. It's just a place that she belongs to. So this idea that the third culture kid's world is intangible. It's not necessarily tied to one visible place. It's not geographical according to passport country. Home is defined by relationships. It can be everywhere and nowhere in a third culture kid world. So again, neither fully the world of their parents' cultures nor fully the world of the other cultures in which they were raised. So that's an interesting place to be, isn't it? Now, when you think about it, if you have come from a monocultural background and you grew up in one place and lived in one place until you moved to the next, but you were already formed in adulthood, you might have a strong sense of place and belonging. Like, this is my country and I believe in it and I want to go back to it, etc. But if you've moved around and you've crossed cultures in your formative years, that is a vastly different experience than growing up in one place. So let's look at some of the characteristics. Cross-cultural lifestyle, obviously. High mobility. This might mean that you move or your children move, or that you're in a community that changes all the time. Lots of international communities change continuously. New people coming in, people coming out. And so that mobility doesn't necessarily mean that you're moving your family. It could be that your children are exposed in an international school or in an international community that changes on a constant basis. Another is expected repatriation. This is the idea that a parent or a caregiver is saying, someday we're going back to, or we're going to my home country or one of the parents' home countries. And so there's this overlay that says, we're not here for forever. We're going somewhere else. That's also a piece of expected repatriation. So let's look at a few benefits and some challenges of the third culture. First of all, relationship building. Third culture kids are very good at building relationships because they are able to negotiate culture. They have cross-cultural skills that allow them to take cultural cues and also apply those and navigate those and be able to build new relationships. Again, they have mobility skills. They can pick up and move to a next place and apply their skills. They have an expanded worldview. Many of them, when they hear the news, they might know someone from that country, or they might have been to that country. And so it's more of a real worldview than many people that haven't had that experience. They struggle sometimes, as you heard Abir, with identity. What do I look like? Where do I belong? My parents want me to be this. I don't want to be fully that. I want to be something else. Who am I? So that's part of the identity. Let's look at some of the variations of third culture kids. So both parents from the same culture living overseas several years in a culture other than their own, again with expected repatriation. They intend to return to their home country. Or both parents choose to live overseas with the aim of immigrating to that country and obtaining citizenship. So a permanence idea that we're moving to this country. Let's say you're moving to France and you're going to stay in France and you're immigrate, you're going to get citizenship. Another might be the parents married someone of another culture and are living in one of their countries, or the parents married someone of another culture and are working long time in a third, or adopting a child from a country other than the one they live in, or bringing up children in a country in a multicultural school. All of those are different variations, but lead to young people growing up in a cross-cultural situation. So Ruth Van Reken greatly expanded this with the term cross-cultural kids. So this is an idea that third culture kids, upper left, are really a subset of cross-cultural kids because their cross-cultural kids have so many different variations. So let's look at educational CCKs down at the bottom, for example. So this would be a cross-cultural young person who's moved from, let's say here, to go to a university or go to a high school or boarding school overseas. So they're moving into a cross-cultural environment from another cross-cultural environment for the purposes of education. Another one might be children of refugees, people that have come in and are now living in Germany, for example, Syrian refugees flooding into Europe. They are children of refugees, cross-cultural kids. They may not have high mobility. They may be in Germany permanently. No one knows. But they have some of the similar characteristics. So those are just some examples of a broader view. I'm going to focus more onto the TCK in this context. But again, the cross-cultural skills that are required by these children are very similar when you're talking about cross-cultural kids. So practical skills that are often acquired is that they can very often be an effective cultural bridge. The reason is they can look at cultural cues for both culture and be the person that brings them together. And that is an incredible skill, and it's highly valued. It's something that third culture kids and many cross-cultural kids do naturally because they've grown up that way. That's the way they've looked at the world. They've taken time to understand other cultures, and they have taken time to interpret one culture to another culture. So they're very good at that. Many of them have language skills, obviously more than one language in many cases, have great observational skills, looking at how does this country work, how do the systems of this country work, how do my friends work in this context. Adaptability, they have great ability to go from one place to the other and get it quickly. And they have confidence to start something new, to move and start again. They're not necessarily afraid to do that. They may not want to do it, but they're not necessarily afraid to do it because they have crossed cultures and crossed into different arenas. So let's take a little bit of time to understand the identity issues. So the difference between a traditional, in quotes, monocultural upbringing, because that's changing quickly, and a cross-cultural upbringing. The first thing we need to look at is a little bit of what is culture. So Webster's defines culture as customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of racial, religious, or social group. But I like this next definition of a system of shared assumptions, beliefs, and values, the framework from which we interpret and make sense of life and the world around us. Because that's kind of what it is, isn't it? A culture is kind of a common agreement of what we believe to be right, wrong, valued, not valued. It's a system of shared assumptions. And those shared assumptions are shared by a people group or sometimes a culture, but they don't necessarily transcend culture. Some values do, obviously, but we have a system of shared assumptions. So here's one assumption. Dr. Fath Erickson said this: civilization is when things work the way we expect them to. Now, we would look at this sentence and immediately some of us would say, what? No English teachers in the room. Sorry? Lots of problems, right? Why are there capitals when they shouldn't be? It's not the way we expect it to be. And we would put a value judgment on it as a English teacher and say it's incorrect, right? It's wrong. And so it's not what we expected. It's not the way we know it. And so therefore we say it's wrong. It's not something that we believe in. So we need to look at a little bit of the role of visible and invisible elements of culture. This is Dr. Weaver's cultural iceberg. The first part above the waterline, you're probably familiar with an iceberg. Most of an iceberg is underwater. Only the top is showing. And the top, in our case, in crossing cultures, could be food, traditions, customs, language, the way people look, the way people act. So I'm going to give you a little test because now you've been listening to me for 15 minutes. And so I'm going to ask, what are some assumptions that you have about me based on what you've heard so far, based on the way I look, the way I dress, the way that we've interacted in the last 15 minutes? So what are some shared assumptions that you might make? Okay. Would someone agree with that or disagree? Okay. What else? Okay. What else? Okay. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Good assumption. Good assumption. Do you think I'm married or engaged? Why do you think I'm married? Okay, but in some cultures, this means engaged, if it's on the left hand. So you're assuming I'm married. Okay, that's good. Anything else?
Highly educated.
Thank you. Here's the truth. The truth is, I grew up in America, but I'm German. My first language is German. I learned to speak English when I was 5 years old. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, in a German international community. So my parents were German, our friends were German, we worshiped at a German church, we were involved in a German environment, totally German, we spoke German at home, and most of my relatives were in Germany, and the other half were in the United States that had immigrated. And I'm married an American, and I moved to Germany. I have 4 children. They were all born in Germany. They went to German local schools, but had one foot in the international community as well. And so they had one part of their life highly mobile, and the other part of their life very stable in terms of German friends. And so I lived in Frankfurt for 17 years, and for the last 10 years now, I've lived back in the Seattle area. So that's a little bit about me. But if you dug deeper, the values and
if you just take him into the German bakery in Abu Dhabi, suddenly it's a whole different man.
I'm back in the world, right? So you see the underlying assumptions don't always match up. And it especially doesn't match up with most third culture kids. You know, we have this first idea of who they might be, but what really drives them and what's underneath the surface may be very different. So the way I was raised, the way I view the world, the way that I think about child discipline, the way I think about nationalism, all those things are impacted by my German upbringing, right? And that's something that you don't see unless I tell you or unless you ask me more questions, right? And then we can get to the bottom of who I really am. And the reality is I'm mixed up because I'm a third culture kid and I have 2 passports, and my kids were raised in an English-speaking home in Germany because we chose to speak English at home. And so you see the complications. But again, just to make the point, there is a role of finding out what's underneath. What's driving the third culture kids. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So let's look at some of the spheres of influence, of cultural influence in a CCK's world. First of all, top is the parental. Parents have a great influence. So if you have multicultural already in your marriage, you might have influence in one or more passport cultures. Another is caregivers. So people that are involved in the lives of your young people. This could be a youth person that's caring for your person. It could be a nanny or a caregiver, someone that has contact with your children on a regular basis. Obviously, where they live now has an impact. Where they've lived before has an impact. These are all things that are forming those things underneath the waterline. The ethnic subculture may have an impact depending on where they live in the world. If they live in Japan and they look like me, there will be an impact. And if they're as tall as I am and they live in Korea, there will be an impact. There's ethnic subculture that has an impact. Another is school culture. Do they go to a local school, international school? Is it mixed? How many different nationalities go there? All of those things are impacting the cultural influence in a CCK's world. Another one that we don't think about very often is the sponsoring organization. And what I mean by that is usually the parent's employer. So let's say, for example, it's an oil company. So this child may be an oil company kid, right? Or perhaps it's a government representative's child, so a son or daughter of a diplomat. If the son or daughter of a diplomat gets into trouble in the host country, the chances are it will affect their parent's job. In other sponsoring organizations, that might not be the case, but again, those sponsoring organizations make a difference. Let's say it's a child that's with an organization that's a non-governmental organization, and they have a different system identity. Or they're military dependents. That's also a different system identity. So all of those things are at play when children are forming their identities. And so that's why there's a lot of complexity to what's underneath the waterline in a third culture kid. So what happens as a result of this? What are some of the expressions? One of them is hidden diversity. This idea that diversity of experience that's shaping a person's life and view, but is not readily apparent or obvious on the outside, unlike the usual diversity markers of race, ethnicity, nationality, etc. So again, in Germany, I could look like a German. It's no problem, right? That would be a marker for a lot of people. My face wouldn't give me away that I have any American background. But if I look like this and act like this, you will assume I'm an American in that sense. So I have a diversity, but it's hidden, right? And many of you and many of your children have a diversity that's also hidden, and understanding where that lies. So let's look at some of the ways that this reflects itself. So the first upper left would be the foreigner. So this is someone who looks different from the surrounding host culture, and they think differently from the surrounding host culture. So someone would say they're a foreigner. Okay, they look like a foreigner, they think differently, obviously they must act differently. The next one might be they look differently, but they think alike, and they're adopted into the culture, which means that the diversity is they look different, so that's a little bit easier for some people to get, but they think of the same as the surrounding culture. So, for example, I have a friend who actually grew up in Japan as a cross-cultural kid, and he looks like me, but he's Japanese. I mean, his thought process and the way he acts and the way he reacts and the way he encounters people is Japanese. So he looks completely different, but he thinks alike to the culture that he grew up in the Japanese culture. He speaks fluent Japanese and is probably better Japanese than his English. Another would be the hidden immigrant. So this would be me in Seattle growing up in a German culture. I look alike, really wouldn't differentiate myself on the way I look, but I think quite differently. When I was together with a group of peers, I would call home and speak to my parents in German, right? That's different than any of the peers that I was surrounded with. No one else was calling their parents in a foreign language in the context that I was in. Then the mirror would be they look alike and they think alike. So that's kind of alignment on all levels. So that's the mirrors in relationship to the surrounding dominant culture. Now, here in the UAE, this is an interesting thing because the surrounding dominant culture is already quite international. It's, has diversity in it. But let's say we transplanted your children or yourself to the surrounding dominant culture, let's say Mexico, for example. So the reactions you could see, you might look different, right? You might automatically, people think you think different. You see how it changes if you have a surrounding dominant culture that's very monocultural. Here, you have a surrounding dominant culture that's in the international. It's very diverse already, but there's still diversity going on in terms of the locals and the expats that are here. So some common reactions as third culture kids try to sort out their identity. This is in their formative years. One might be the chameleon. They try to find the same as identity. So they're trying to fit into the culture. They're trying to do everything they can to fit into the culture. They don't want to be seen as being different. I call this kind of the middle school idea. You don't want to stand out, so be as chameleon as you can. The next one might be the screamer, the one that says, I don't like the surrounding dominant culture. I want to find a different identity. I want everyone to know I'm from whatever country I'm from, or whatever country one of my parents is from, even though I don't necessarily have never lived in that country. I have a different identity, and I'm going to say that that's what I have. The next one might be the wallflower and says, I want to be invisible. I don't want people to know where I'm from. I don't want to talk about where I'm from. It's not something that I want to share, or I want to put my foot on one nationality or the other. So let me read this poem to you, and as I read it, think about the feeling behind this person who is just trying to express themselves and figure out their identity, similar to what Abir said. But this is a poem from a State Department dependent, so someone who had moved quite often around the world. So this is what she said. I grew up in yellow country, but my parents are blue. I'm blue, or at least that's what they told me. But I play with the yellows. I went to school with the yellows. I spoke the yellow language. I even dressed and appeared to be yellow. Then I moved to the blue land. Now I go to school with the blues. I speak the blue language. I even dress and look blue. But deep down inside me, something's yellow. I love the blue country, but my ways are tinted with yellow. When I'm in blue land, I want to be in yellow. When I'm in yellow land, I want to be blue. Why can't I find a place where I can be both? A place where I can be me. A place where I can be green. I just want to be green. You hear that? They're struggling, trying to figure out, okay, I want to be blue when I'm in blue country, and I want to be yellow when I'm in yellow, but I'm not really. I want to be me. I want to have green. And that's really difficult to do. So that's part of how third culture and cross-cultural kids are processing that. Now, looking at some of the critical family challenges as people cross cultures, one, of course, is children's education. Parents are always thinking about, do I homeschool? Do I put them in international school, local school? What's it going to look like? So children's education is a large factor. The other one, though, is family adjustment. So failures of international assignments, most failures occur because of lack of the ability of the family to adjust, not because of the job. It's the lack of the ability for the family to actually make that cross-cultural transition. Some of that might be partner resistance. Partner says, no, I don't really want to move to Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Elaine. Difficult locations. I don't want to move to X, Y, or Z for whatever reason. But there are some critical family challenges surrounding TCKs already. So let me just talk to you about our personal experience in moving cross-culturally. So bottom left, I already told you that I was the German in America, the hidden immigrant. Then on the bottom right, I married an American in America. So my wife is American. I met her and married her in America. And then we decided to move to Germany. And so for the move to Germany, it was familiar to me because I'd been back and forth to Germany. My parents were German. I spoke the language, no problem. It was not familiar to my wife, who had to learn German and had not been regularly back and forth to Germany. And so then we decided to move to Germany. And we have German-American children in Germany. So my children have two passports, German and American. As I said, we grew up speaking English in the home and German outside the home. And they are developing this third culture. They're in this space of understanding who they are and where they belong. And then one day we say, we're going to relocate for the parents, but locate to America for my children. My children have never lived in America, so it's not back to America for my children. It's to America. They're moving to America, not back to America. For my wife and I, we're moving back to America because we've lived there before. We've crossed that culture. We've been through that culture change. We've been through it. We're going through it again. And I can tell you the most difficult transition in our family was the transition of my wife moving back to her home country because she had changed, her country had changed, and her perception of that had changed, whereas I held it more loosely because I'd already experienced a cross-cultural experience in America. Does that make sense? And my children were just discovering what's America all about. So you can see how as we moved to that, I just want to make the point that it was emigration for children and repatriation for the parents. And that's an important point because we say this a lot. We say we're moving, if we have this idea of expected repatriation and we've grown up with our children in a cross-cultural environment, we've maybe been in the UAE for 5 or 6 or 4 or whatever years, and we say we're moving back to somewhere. It may not be back if they've never lived there. Or they may not view it as back to home because they feel at home here or they feel at home somewhere else in a different country. And that's a struggle for us as parents. It can be a very big struggle to understand now my child's identity has grown up. It's different. It's different than what I am and who I am. And they're not aligned the same as I thought they would be. And so remember, they're going through it in their identity forming years, not when they've already rooted and grounded in one place. So what did this look like? So my children were essentially hidden immigrants in Germany and America. Because in Germany, unless they opened their mouth and started speaking English, they were German kindergarten, German schools, everything else. nobody would ever know that they were American. I'll tell you one story which really made me laugh. I was picking up my daughter from, I think it was kindergarten. And in Germany, you take public buses to kindergarten. So you send off your child on a public bus, which you would never do in America. But you do that in Germany. And she came back, and she was trying to tell me something that had happened in kindergarten. And she said, she stuttered in English. And I said, well, why don't you just tell me in German? Because I could see that she hadn't switched from being in a German kindergarten to being at home speaking English. So she looked at me and she said, what's German? And I said, well, it's the way how you speak when you're in school. Oh, okay. Then she rattled off German. So this idea of, this hidden diversity goes both ways. When my children arrived in America, no one knew that they spoke German. They looked American. They looked like me. They spoke like I did because of my American accent. So they fit in. They didn't have a British accent. They may have had some quirks on their British English because they met a lot of South Africans and Brits and everyone else. But so the assumption of their peers was, you're an American. And you should know everything that an American 14, 15, 16-year-old knows. And they didn't, right? Because they hadn't grown up in American culture. They'd experienced American culture, but they hadn't grown up through it. So they missed a lot of cultural things. They didn't know things. They didn't understand certain idioms or certain phrases or whatever it is. My eldest daughter struggled with understanding chemistry in English. She knew chemistry in German. She knew maths in German. But translating every time was just another layer, right? But she spoke perfect English. So her teachers expected her to, why don't you get this in chemistry? So there's different variations of that. So lack of local knowledge. The other one was allegiance, the idea of who do you have allegiance to? Which nation do you belong to? And I admit this around the world, and I've admitted it, this will be the third time this trip that I've admitted my major parenting fail. But I failed to inform my children about something before their first day of school. And what I failed to inform them about is that in American schools, at least in the area that we were living in, there is a pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America every morning in the classroom, where the children stand up and they salute the flag by putting their hand over their heart, and they recite a pledge to the flag, to the nation, right? Most of you know that Germany, since World War II, is not nationalistic. In fact, quite the opposite. The Postal Service decided not to have uniforms because it was too controversial to have uniforms. The German flag is rarely flown by individuals. So this idea that's shocking that A, we would salute the flag and pledge our allegiance to a nation, and B, you didn't tell us about that. So we were at the supper table that night, and they said, you really messed up because you didn't tell us that we were going to do this. They didn't know the pledge. They felt uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do. So allegiance, am I American? So do I have to do this? Or am I German? Or what am I? So another one might be different perspectives. And some of you have had children that have gone through this where they tell about this experience that they've had overseas. And other people that haven't lived cross-culturally or been a part of that look at them as arrogant because they have done certain things that people may have dreamt of doing. Like they maybe went on a scuba dive in Egypt one time. And people say, well, that's amazing. You went scuba diving in Egypt. And well, that was the closest scuba diving, so that's where we went. Or you saw the pyramids or whatever it is. And so TCKs often don't tell the full story because they're afraid that they're going to be perceived as arrogant on one piece or another. So they hide pieces of that. In my case, my children didn't tell people that they learned to ski in France. That was one of the things they didn't share with many people because that would be perceived as arrogant. I skied in the Alps. I learned to ski in the Alps. I skied at Verbier in the Matterhorn and a couple other places. And in America, in our context, that would be, wow, you must be very wealthy, or there must be something about you. So children hide some of those things sometimes. Again, not quite either fully German or fully American in the case of my children. So we mix a lot of customs in our family to our liking. So the German tradition, for example, at Christmas is to open Christmas presents on Christmas Eve. American tradition of my wife is Christmas Day. So what do? Both. So that's a great compromise. But we do that in our family all the time. We take these different customs that we experience cross-culturally, and we adopt them and put them in our family, and we mix them to our liking. And we put them in our context of our family, and that's something that grows and develops over time. So I want to go to this part right here, which is kind of practical application of how do we go through cross-cultural transition with our young people. So this is just a little bit of a acrostic: talk, opportunities, grieving, emotions, think, hold, engage, and rest. So I'll walk through each one of these rather quickly. So the first thing to understand is the idea of culture stress. So when we're crossing cultures, and when your children are crossing cultures, there's somewhat of a fun stage, the honeymoon stage. You know, this is great, it's new, exciting, it's similar, there's some things that I know and I want to discover, and it's all exciting, and there's a piece that's the honeymoon stage. The next stage is, oh, but there's some things I really don't like. It's too hot, it's too dusty, my microwave doesn't work, or whatever it is. There's this, it's different and it's alarming, and I'm alarmed by it. The next might be, it's not only different, but it's bad. I put a value judgment on it and say, these people don't know what they're doing. This culture is not matching up to what I thought it would be, and I'm in this fight internally. In the middle of that fight, sometimes we tend to mock other cultures. We tend to look at the other culture and say, well, either they're less intelligent or they just haven't figured that out yet, or whatever it is. And as parents, sometimes we get into this mocking of culture, and that's a very, very dangerous place to be. So I would suggest, if you feel that you want to mock the culture, lock yourself up in a room with your spouse, have a little mocking session, but don't do it in front of your kids, and because they're going to pick up on that in terms of how you view the other culture. Then one day you say, well, it's different, but it's okay. I can accept that. That's something that will fit. And then there's understanding, and eventually you say, well, it's different, and I'm open to living that way. It's something that I'm going to adopt and I can live with. So what to remember about this culture stress is that it occurs at different rates in your family, and it occurs in different ways according to personalities in your family. So some of your children may say, I'm in the honeymoon stage, and I'm going to stay there. I love this place. I have no idea that, you know, and another child may say, there's no way. I want to be here. I don't like this about the culture. I don't like this about my school, whatever it is, and they're in the fight mode. And you may already be through all of it and be open to living this new thing, have crossed the culture and been a part of it. So helping your family understand, where are they on the culture stress side of things? Are they fighting? Are they accepting? Are they creatively adopting things from the culture? Or where is the family in that context? So in order to do that is really to talk as much as possible. And one of the ways that we can talk about things is addressing what we've left, the things that we've lost. And we don't like doing that when we're crossing cultures. As parents, we usually are on the encouraging side, and we say, it's going to be wonderful. New place is so much better than the old place. You're going to love it. And we don't give permission to grieve the good things that happened in the last place. And that's a very important step. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But remind your kids that they can never lose what they've gained as CCKs or TCKs. And some of those things we talked about, the ability to bridge cultures, build relationships, be mobile, be able to observe culture and act on it. All those things are things they're gaining. And the next cross-cultural experience is actually building on that foundation to make them better culture bridge people, better people that work alongside of it. So moving towards the future is building on that foundation. The next one I want to talk about is opportunities. When you enter a new culture or a new place, evaluating opportunities very carefully, because everything takes time. It takes time on family time and relationships. Each school event, each soccer event, or whatever it is, or football, rugby, anything that takes time, your involvement on a volunteer basis in different things takes time. So evaluating those opportunities carefully, recognizing where you are on the cultural stress scale with your family, and acting accordingly in terms of taking opportunities. Children need a community of peers. So what I talked about earlier is the place that third culture and cross-cultural kids feel the most at home is in relationship to other people who are going through the same experience. That's where they feel most comfortable and most at home. And so that is a community of peers. Sometimes that occurs at school, but most of the time it happens in community groups or people's gatherings where there are third culture kids or cross-cultural kids that are gathering. Parents need that too. Parents need to be able to share that ability to talk about these cross-cultural issues in a place that understand each other. So let's say you're someone that's crossed a lot of cultures. Though I want to encourage you to shift your focus to other people around you that maybe haven't done it as often as you have. So the newcomer that's coming in, how do we come alongside of them if you're in a mobile community? How do we help them navigate the cross-cultural change, the culture shock, the actual logistics of going through the next place to live? So I would encourage you, if that's you, if you know how this culture works and you know how things work, consider focusing on others around you to help them through that. Look for ways to help each other. So I want to touch on this grieving idea again. Not something we like to talk about a lot. The first thing I want to say is that as parents, we need to be much more open to permitting the fact that our kids are grieving the places that they've lived. It's okay to say that you miss something somewhere. To say, I miss that place, I miss those people, I miss the way we did it in the last place, whatever it is. Take time to walk through that with your children. It's difficult, but it's very helpful to go through that process. I'll give you one example from our family. So my daughter was a soccer captain on an all-boys team. So she had risen to the top of her game. She was the only female captain of an all-boys team. So if you can figure that one out. But she was a football star in her context. And the time came to leave, right? We were moving to America. And so she was giving that up. She was giving up her team and we were moving to America. Her team put together a scrapbook of their games, the people, the coaches, major wins, everything that they had done together. And a few months after we moved, we sat on the sofa at home, the couch at home, and we paged through that book. And we just wept. I just wept with my daughter about her pain of having to leave that. And that's not something that is comfortable. It's not very fun, but it's really important to recognize the losses and to help your family go through those. Recognize and validate the identity and relationship with the international culture as well as the passport culture. Look at ways where you can bring your kids through that process. This is the hardest thing. Give ourselves and children permission and time to mourn. We're also not good at that because we're leading the family, right? So our difficulty when we're moving to the next location is we don't allow time to mourn the last location because we have to be on. We have to be the ones that are leading and encouraging and making it happen, right? So we rarely give ourselves time to actually process the change that has happened. But in order to really do that, you have to take some time to do it. Some ways to do this with young people is naming the losses, the obvious ones and the hidden ones, with a journal, a scrapbook, talking to someone that's not going to just fix it and trying to fix everything, but just listen to what your children are experiencing. And this last one is, for us, comfort before encouraging. So comfort your children of the losses that they've experienced before you say it's going to be amazing, right? Because we all want it to be amazing in the next place, but recognize that there are things that they have given up and that you can help them walk through. The next one I want to touch on is emotions. As anyone who has done an international cross-cultural move knows, emotions run high during those kinds of moves. Allow some latitude without personal attacks. And this is an interesting one. Children have a big sense of loyalty in a lot of different ways. So sometimes, let's say you're moving from the UAE, you've been here a few years, and they don't want to be disloyal to the UAE by saying it was bad experience, or or this next place is going to be better than where I've lived before. Otherwise, I'm questioning my loyalty and how I feel about the UAE, or France, or whatever it is, the country they've been involved in. So remind them they don't have to reject the past or the present. They can have this both and. They can have the experience that they had internationally. Another one I just want to leave with you is discern what is life and what is culture shock. When we're in that cultural transition, a punctured tire can be blamed on the country, right? This is a terrible place. I'm having a punctured tire, and it's not, it's culture shock. Well, it's not. It's just life, right? It's just something that happens in every country. But because we're under stress, we start blaming it on the country, or the refrigerator doesn't work, or the stove doesn't work, or whatever it is. It's this country. Well, it's not. It's just culture shock and life. So, to give you perspective on how a third culture kid is processing life, here's a quote. "My life is like Windows. Each part is open and accessible, but I have to operate on the one that's on the screen." So picture a desktop, and you have these different windows open, and one comes to the fore, and that's the window, right? So when I went to, let's take my example, growing up. When I went to U.S. school, American school, I opened one window, and I was speaking English all day, and I came back home, and I closed that window, and I spoke German to my parents. And then when I traveled to Germany, I would open up another window and be with my relatives in Germany. And you can see that all these things that are happening, right? So if your children are going between cultures, they're opening windows, they're closing others, it can be exhausting. It can be very difficult, because then you start going, well, who am I in the midst of that? Am I all these windows together? But I have to operate on the one that's on the screen. I don't have a choice. I have to pick one. So my kids are good at this. Your kids, if you've grown cross-culturally, they're good at this. One of the ones I like to observe my children's windows open is when they're at my mother's house, their Oma, their grandmother's house, with a circle of my mother's German friends. So immediately they go from the American context to almost like they were in Germany, because they're surrounded by German friends, and my mother, who speaks German. And so they're in that context, and that window is fully open. They're speaking German, they're chatting, they would never know that they're American, right? So the TCKs and CCKs are very good at that. So think and reflect. This is as you're going to the next place or considering a new place. Think and reflect together about the old and the new. What are we expecting of this new culture in this new place? What does it look like? Intentionally learn about the places you live and visit. So history, geography, culture. The reason that this is important is, remember the cultural iceberg. Your kids are going to observe a lot of things above the waterline that they won't understand unless they understand what's the history, the geography, the culture of the people, or that cultural group. So take time as you're transferring or crossing cultures, figure it out. What are some of the driving values beneath the waterline? What are some things that are causing these outward behaviors? And some cultures are more obvious than another on that. Another suggestion is developing a strong sense of family identity. Do you do some things the same everywhere you go that your kids will expect? Do you always hang the same picture on the wall? Do you always have dinner on the floor on Friday nights? Whatever it is, a strong sense of family identity that's the same in every place that you go, because you're the most consistent thing. Is the family unit is the most consistent thing in a mobily changing environment as kids are growing up. So holding on to traditions, finding ways to keep family traditions. Kids expect consistency. If my children didn't celebrate Christmas Eve and Christmas Day now, it wouldn't be consistent with the way we've done it for their entire life. So don't start changing big things like that, because the continuity is important. It's something that's stable and important. Maintaining close contacts with relatives, both here and there, if you can. Keep as many of the language skills as possible. I like this perspective again. It's my pen pal in Kenya. Does he talk about hunting lions and elephants? No, he complains about having too much homework. There's similarities across many different cultures, and kids are going through the same things in different ways. So perspective. Another one is engaging with the new culture. If you've been in an international community long enough, you've probably met people that refuse to engage into the new culture. They're saying, I'm only here for a short period of time or whatever it is, and I don't really want to experience the new culture, so I'll just hold myself up out of it a bit. Try not to run from new ways of doing things, making new friends, experiencing new places. One of the things we really appreciated about living in Germany is that stores, grocery stores, retail stores, all of those things are closed on Sundays. It provided for us an amazing, calm Sunday where you couldn't go shopping. You could maybe go out and have a meal, but you couldn't actually go shopping. And so we thought, well, this is really kind of nice. And we've done it for 17 years. And so when we moved to America, we decided we are going to act as if the stores are all closed on Sunday. We won't go to the mall. We won't get milk. If we run out of something, too bad. We'll get it on Monday. And we've lived pretty much that way for the last 10 years. Our friends, and people think we're crazy. How do you fit in? You don't go shopping, right, Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning or whatever it is. Life goes on. It still works, right? So for us, it was new because it was a new tradition forced upon us in a way. But we've adopted it, and that's how we live. So again, experience new places, engage with the new culture. Another modern piece of this increases the complexity. Holding on and engaging. So Skype, Facebook, Instagram, all those things that kids are involved in. There is a risk that when you move from one culture to another, that your children will focus on where they left at the expense of engaging with the new culture because of the ability to remain on social media or be connected with that group of friends. So again, encourage your children to engage with those people, keep engaged with those people, but not at the expense of engaging with new people. So if your child is coming home from school and they're on Instagram, Facebook, and Skype, and none of those people are people that they have context with in the new place, that's going to be a problem down the road. So helping them to balance that and understand that. So find out what's going on there. Another perspective from a TCK. When you grow up, seeing and experiencing so much, you realize how vast and enormous your options are. This makes staying put and choosing things that will make it difficult to change, to move, unattractive. Decision-making can be tricky. You're always wondering what you decided was right, constantly second-guessing. There's often a trade-off between exploration and stability. So this idea that the paralysis sometimes of, I have so many options for young people, TCKs, third culture kids. I've seen this in my children. My children happily would say, well, I could live in Thailand, I could live in Germany, I could live in South America, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. There's a trade-off between exploration and stability for third culture kids. They've experienced a lot of different things going on around them, and so they see the world, again, in a different way than maybe we did if we grew up in one place. Next one I would leave you with is rest periods are essential. Change is stressful, and it demands those intentional rest periods. planning with your children versus informing them about a move, helping them to think through what that's going to look like, obviously age appropriate. Vacation as you travel. I would highly encourage this if you're moving across the world or in a cross-cultural situation. Take time to be with your family and take a break if you can. Explore as you travel. Again, history, geography, location. So if you're getting there, take some time to understand the culture that you're getting into. Adapt and go with your family on that. So the last thing I want to encourage you with is that all of us need community. And here's a quote. We live in a society where, despite widespread concerns about children and teenagers, the vast majority of adults are not actively involved in the lives of young people outside their own families. This reality has a profound impact on community life and on young people's development. Without the attention of many adults in all parts of their lives and community, young people are deprived of important sources of guidance, care, socialization. Remember that circle of influence? Besides parents, there are caregivers, there are schools, there are people from the sponsoring organization. If we all are working together to help kids go through with guidance, nurture, care, and socialization, they will grow up to be able to cross cultures effectively and be a cultural bridge in the future.